Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Kile Quick One. Na leo tuko na mwenyeji wa sheria huko. I'll let you to introduce yourself. What is your name?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karim Anjarwalla. I'm the senior partner of ALN Kenya, Anjarwalla Khanna.
Umeniambia unajua Kiswahili kidogo ya kuomba maji.
Hapa naongea kabisa.
Unaongea kabisa.
Tuendelee na Swahili tu.
So, what has been the highlight of your week?
My week, gosh. The highlight of my week was, or has been, the fact that I was away on vacation on Monday. And I got a bit of time off with a long weekend on Friday. And came back to a deluge of work starting on Tuesday.
You take vacations on Monday as well?
Not regularly. But from time to time.
From time to time. Yeah. I also want to work here if I can take off.
Sure, with pleasure.
So let's jump straight into it. Many people watch this show, watch it for the journey. So I want you to take me through the young Karim. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? The formative years, primary school, high school. Yeah, we can start with your primary school.
I think maybe you should correct your question. The younger Karim. So I'm from Mombasa.
Yes.
Born and bred in Mombasa. My family lived there for generations. People don't believe it, but I say I'm a Loreto boy.
This Loreto?
No, Loreto, Mombasa. It was the only one that took boys, actually. So I studied there. Then I went to Aga Khan.
Still in Mombasa?
In Mombasa.
Yeah.
And then when I was 16, I went to the UK for my A-levels and university and law school. I trained in the UK and then came back.
No, let's not hurry there.
Okay.
So at this time, what kind of a student are you? Are you the one who's always number one? Are you the one who's the cheeky one? What kind of a student are you during these formative years?
I'm the overweight one. I think academics came easy to me. So I was, I guess, always kind of academic in my inclination. A swimmer as well. I swam for the Coast Province. In those days, people from Nairobi would beat us. I think the tables are now turned.
Why would guys beat you from Nairobi and you guys grew with water?
Yeah, I know. It's an interesting thing, right? Because I think they had just had better training. So we were strong natural swimmers, but weren't coached with stroke and technique and so on. So swimming was my thing. I lived not far from the beach. So academics were just, the parental influence meant that you couldn't stray too far from the books.
So when you go to the UK, do you have family there? Or you told me you went at 16.
I did. I went to boarding school at 16. So I was 1987. The world was very different. A lot, if you like, a lot less integrated. And we had much less awareness. So you can imagine moving from Mombasa to the UK at the age of 16. It was quite a bit of a culture shock, but I adjusted.
Ulienda Eton. I hear guys go to the UK. I was like,
no,
Eton.
It was even better, especially with the big game tomorrow, right? No, not tomorrow. Saturday is the big rugby game. I went rugby, where the game started.
Winchester?
No, rugby.
Oh, rugby?
Yeah.
Harrow Road? Somewhere there?
Rugby is in the Midlands, near Birmingham, is the largest big city. And a gentleman called William Webb Ellis, with a fine disregard for the rules of football as played in his day, picked up the ball and ran, and therefore invented the game of rugby.
So just to detour, just to build on that point, who are you supporting on Saturday?
Well, I think it's a given, right? It's a given. It's an African team is playing. So in the final, so I'm supporting South Africa.
I'm supporting South Africa. Okay, let's get back to it. So you finished your high school. Do you come back immediately, or you went to university there?
Went to university. I studied law and politics.
Law and politics.
Yeah, at Durham. And then I went to law school in London for a year. And then I trained for 2 years at a firm in the city in London. And then I was to stay on a bit longer, but my father passed away while I was training. And my brother, who had joined my father at the firm in Mombasa, requested that I come back to join him to share the workload. So that's what I did. And that was in 1996.
1996.
Yeah.
So you come back to Kenya. How is the experience at Kenya School of Law?
Very different, I think, from what it was now, because I was a solicitor, a Kenyan citizen and a solicitor. So I got exempted from most things. Now, if I remember correctly, I think I had to sit ethics, accounting, maybe property and constitutional, I think. There were about 4 papers that I had to sit, which I did. And it was all quite smooth. Yeah. And I didn't have to attend class, I just had to sit the exam.
Oh.
Yeah. So, it was, of course, that was many decades ago, things have moved on. But yeah, it was easy.
And pupillage, do you do pupillage? Because
No.
I'm imagining you'd already...
I was a qualified lawyer, you
Yes,
see?
yeah.
So I was exempted from pupillage. I just had to sit these 4 exams. And having sat them, I was then eligible to be admitted as an advocate.
So you when do you get admitted?
I'm thinking, end of 96, early 97, maybe. Right? I mean, soon after I didn't wait around. I went straight into it.
And after that, where do you start working?
So, this firm was founded by my late father in 1954. In fact, next year we celebrate our 70 years.
Oh,
So that's the firm I joined. Right? My brother had, as I mentioned, already joined it. And so that's the firm I joined in Mombasa, at the Mombasa office, which we still have a Mombasa office. And so that's where I worked. And that's where we began to grow the firm. And it was in 2000 that I then moved to Nairobi.
Oh, so Mombasa office was the first office?
Absolutely.
And then you guys decided to branch into Nairobi?
Correct.
How was the experience, considering that guys in Coast have different ways of doing things, and when you come to this side, guys are always in a hurry. How did you adapt to that?
Well, remember I had worked in London, so being hurried was normal to me. So in a way, coming to Nairobi was more like, similar to what I had already experienced in the UK. So that wasn't really a concern. It was a very different age, right? If you go back to 2000, that was 2 years before the end of Moi. Right? So very different time, very different age, very different view on Kenya and Africa as well. So the market wasn't as buoyant. Nairobi wasn't even a quarter of the city that it is now. Okay? I think those of us who have lived here more recently forget how different a place it was. But the move was great. I moved with my wife. I just had my first son. He was, I think, 6 months old at the time we moved. So it was a nice, fresh time, fresh start in life, and full of hope and possibility. And of course, 2002 changed a lot, because with the start of the Kibaki government, there was a sense of optimism, which kind of combined with a global narrative around Africa that had begun to change. From being the hopeless continent, it had become the hopeful continent. And so we were just, kind of well placed, timing wise and so on, around that time.
So you come back to Nairobi. Do you come with other associates, or you come and start from scratch alone?
So actually what we did was that we merged with a firm called AR Kapila and Company. Right? At the time, you may have heard of the late AR Kapila. So we merged with his firm. And the idea is that they would bring litigation expertise and we would bring corporate expertise, and through that create a full service firm. So that's actually how we entered Nairobi. The merger in the event didn't last. 4 years later, we very amicably decided to demerge, and each of the firms went their own way. And that is the firm that continues now.
So In this episode, we've had a guest. I don't know if you know Chacha Odera.
And of course, yeah.
So Chacha gave us his insights about their merger and their demerger as well. What are some of the lessons that you learned from that time, and probably you've used to build this mammoth?
Right. I guess, especially in law firms, right? Mergers are about bringing people together. So the real question should be around personal fit, personal aspirations, personal chemistry, if you like, rather than kind of economics. Because the economics have a way of working out. I mean, you've got to focus on economics, but they'll have a way of working out. But especially with firms like ours that are, we are obviously large by Kenyan standards, but still small firms globally, okay? So sharing aspirations and vision with your partners is essential. And so if there's one thing I would say about, lawyers or law firms considering mergers, focus a lot on the personal chemistry and relationships between partners, because that's what's the glue. That is the glue, essential glue in building a good firm.
So you start off? Of course, you don't start afresh. You move with your team, right?
Right.
And you continue what you've been doing.
Exactly.
So at that time, do you start hiring litigation advocates, or you just focus on commercial law?
So we initially decided just to remain focused on what we were doing, which was commercial law, and we outsourced, if you like, what litigation came to us through many friends who had litigation practices. And then after some time, we realized that it wasn't, if we had aspirations to become a top firm and provide a full service to our clients, obviously we needed a litigation offering. So we then hired a litigation partner and litigation associates and grew the team from there.
How big is the team?
You mean how big is the firm? Or
yes.
Gosh. Well, so the firm in Kenya, we probably have about, I don't have the exact number, 230 staff, of whom give or take 20 are in Mombasa, 25 in Mombasa, the rest are in Nairobi. Yeah, that's the size of the firm in Kenya. We have a affiliated firm also in Tanzania and in Dubai. Each of those have about 30 people in them. And of course, and we can talk about this, but over the last 20 years, we've built the ALN footprint, which is now in 14 countries.
In Africa or global?
Across Africa.
Across Africa.
Across Africa, with an office in Dubai.
In an office in Dubai. Yeah. So what informed the decision to form such a large network?
So I guess, we looked around as we were practicing and realized that accounting firms, for example, work everywhere, right? If you take a Pricewaterhouse or a BDO or any of these large, well-known accounting firms, you'll find them in multiple countries globally. But with law firms, it was different, right? It was quite hard to find firms in Africa, in fact, there weren't any, who were practicing in multiple jurisdictions. And of course, there are good reasons for that, because of course, accounting standards are the same everywhere, right, by and large. But law is different. Even in countries that share a common law background, the actual laws are different. So it's obviously easier to cross borders as an accounting firm. Plus, there are regulatory restrictions and, Advocates Act or the equivalent in different markets and so on. But we still realize that, I guess, our clients were looking for solutions across the continent. So our strategy was to work with like-minded firms with whom we already had experience and relationship, in whose integrity, in whose quality, and in whose efficiency we trusted, and to bring them under a common brand. And to use that then, to use scale, to develop quality systems, processes, know-how, IT, and all the things that you need to build a great law firm. So yeah, it was responsive to client needs, and responsive to how the continent was also developing. In many ways, I like to say that ALN was the precursor to the AFCFTA. We're trying to create our own continental free trade area well before the politicians thought it was a good idea.
And we're also going to talk about that because I've heard you in quite a number of podcasts talking about it.
Right.
But we'll
Sure.
have that conversation later on.
Sure.
So when you're forming these international affiliations, how are decisions made? Because I think it's a whole train. How do you have a partnership board? Or do you have how are decisions made at what level? How is the structure?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it starts off obviously with deciding who you want within your alliance. And we sort of have three criteria. Integrity is the first. I always say integrity is binary. You either have it or don't, right? Then quality and efficiency. You can work on those two. Right? You can become higher quality, you can become more efficient. And so that was the prism through which we looked at potential partners. We tended to have worked with firms for a few years, so already got to know them, got to know their people, got to know their families. So, built on quite a strong basis of personal relationship. And then we would ask them to join ALN. And ALN is, it's structured by and large, like many other law firms or large accounting firms. We are members of an organization. We have our own board, right, an independent board. So the law firms in country can remain independent, but integrated via their membership in ALN and integrated via the common standards, branding, systems, and so on that we adopt.
Wow, interesting. And so I'm just thinking, the farm was started by your old man, and your brother is working there. How is the relationship? Do you guys, when you go home, do you guys just keep bantering about law stuff, or how is it? And have you pushed any of your kids into the practice of law? Subtly, or
So I have two boys. I think that if you're going to build a great business, then you need to be slightly crazy and a bit obsessed. Yeah, you kind of need to. So yeah, absolutely. I lived, breathed, and talked about the law firm, and so on as we built it. Right? And I'm so blessed that we have the most phenomenal bunch of partners who, in fact, are the key part. Law firms are nothing more than people, right? I mean, the rest are necessary additions, computers and software and buildings and so on. But Justice and Anthony, who you've met, and all the other people in the firm are the ones who make the firm. And so, a large part of our focus has been to kind of first hire and then retain the best talent. As for your second question, have I pushed any of my children into the law? Certainly not. In fact, I encourage them both not to study law as a first degree, to study something else. And of course, I was open-minded about whether or not they wanted to join. But ultimately, I think it's important people do what they feel that what appeals to them most, because that's the most likely way of doing well and succeeding and feeling fulfilled in life. So one of them definitely doesn't want to be a lawyer, and is pursuing is currently in the fintech industry. The second has studied maths and seems to be interested in the law, so may head in that direction. Yeah, time will tell.
Yeah. So you indicated that you hire the best talent and you retain it.
We try.
You try and retain. So when you're hiring, what are you looking for?
That's a great question. And I think the answer to that has changed over time. The answer used to be, in the old days, you're looking for the smartest guys and the smartest ladies, right? I think more than anything, we're looking for attitude and fit, right? Yeah. So I think, and not to make my fellow legal colleagues feel too bad about it, but I don't actually think that the practice of law is a super high IQ profession. right? You know what I mean? I think we lawyers don't like to say that to ourselves, but in fact, being a rocket scientist, being a rocket scientist just needs a certain level of processing power. Okay, you know what I mean? Like it needs to be super high. I think the practice of law requires a high level of IQ, but actually beyond a certain level, I think it's superfluous, right? You then need other characteristics, emotional intelligence, right? Resilience, and a kind of a must-do attitude, right? And you got to be able to fit and work collaboratively in a team. So we obviously have a focus on people who are academically competent, but beyond that, really it's about those characteristics. Will they fit? Will they be a great member of the team? Do they possess the right level of emotional intelligence to respond to complex situations? Those are the areas that we really kind of focus on. Yeah? And we like to hire interesting people. So people who have what I call a large intellectual hinterland. Somebody who's maybe has been a musician or is an author or, you know what I mean, has other interests, not necessarily just focused on law. Yeah.
And just from a small reading, what I've seen from your farm, you've grown homegrown people from them getting into the farm, right, becoming associates, senior associates, all the way to the partnership. And some of them have even become managing partners.
That's right.
How do you do that? How do you inculcate? From where I sit, I see many farms always shying away from that kind of hiring.
Right.
How do you guys manage it?
I think it's actually, at its simplest, it's straightforward. I think if you just treat people fairly, right? If you treat people fairly and run a meritocracy, right? So where people feel that they can be enabled, that their best efforts will be recognized, whether they are whatever race they are, whatever sex they are, whatever religion they are, those things are irrelevant. It's your ability and how you show up every day, right, at the workplace. And if you do that, then the organization will reward you, irrespective of other matters. And I think as long as you can create a culture that speaks to those values, then people will kind of look around and say, hey, yeah, I kind of like this place. Why should I move? Why should I leave? Right? So then there's no push factor. There's a pull factor. Maybe somebody's giving you more money, more responsibility, maybe the opportunity to work overseas or to change roles completely, which may appeal to you. Those are all legitimate pull factors. But we try to reduce what I call the push factors, right? The factors that make somebody want to leave.
Yeah? Interesting.
So as you say, we have two co-managing partners, Daniel Ngumi and Rosa Nduati. Rosa joined as a trainee, over 20 years ago. And Daniel had worked previously, but has joined us, I would say, give or take 15 or 16 years ago. Yeah.
Wow, that's a hell of longevity. I have a friend here. Now I've remembered someone else, Mashari.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Mashari is in Dubai now.
That's right, Edward.
Yeah. I used to work with Edward at the same law firm.
Is that right?
Yeah. He was my senior.
But I'm sure he'll enjoy watching this then.
I'm so sure I'm going to. When I've remembered, I've said, no, I have to mention Mashari here. I mean, that's I was having a conversation with a friend of mine where in many law firms, what usually happens is that by the time you're clocking 5 years, you're never going to become a partner. And if you're going to become a partner, you're only going to become a letterhead partner. So many times you're always looking at what is in there for me longer. Why should I stay longer? Because many times you realize that at that time you come in, you start having your own family. And then you realize, no, I need to make more money for my family. And if I'm not getting partnership, then I might as well as leave. Yeah, so that has been the experience of many law firms and many firms that we see. Let's talk about Gen Zs and millennials. You've changed the hiring strategy. And is that influenced by the different generational gaps or or is it the market or trends? What has influenced that?
When you say we've changed our hiring strategy, what do you mean?
No, you told me traditionally guys used to look for internet.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah, I understand. Well,
Yeah.
so I guess you know, the sort of the problems our clients encounter are increasingly more complex. Okay. And you know, in Kenya, I know we still think it's necessary to study law at undergrad to become a lawyer. Of course, in many markets, take the UK, they in fact encourage you not to have studied law at undergrad. Okay? And of course, the United States has always had a system where you can't even study law at undergrad. So I guess we're looking for people who have strong problem-solving skills, right? And then I guess what we're trying to do is create an environment where Gen Z, or you know, however, whatever moniker you want to apply to this generation, feel empowered and engaged. Right? I think that the range of things that are available for young and talented people has gone up exponentially. Right? In my time, the professions there were 4 or 5 that were known, and you kind of stuck to those. Right? You know, doctor, lawyer, engineer, accountant, etc. You know what I mean. Now it's limitless, right? If you look at the large tech companies that operate here and global multinationals, the VC sector, the opportunities in academia, and so on. So you've got to have a good reason for people to want to stay here, right? And so I think what we try to do is give our young people an interesting experience. We expose them very early, right? So one of the advantages of being here is you will be in key client meetings, meeting our clients from the day you join as a trainee, right? If you're a lawyer. And we allow and we encourage deep participation in our CSR activities, our pro bono activities. We have something called the ALN Academy, which is a charity focused on the rule of law and capacity building on the continent. We encourage involvement in that. We encourage our young lawyers to write articles. You may have seen that some of the articles I write are penned with young lawyers from the firm. And so I think that if you allow professionals to have an interesting array of work to do and allow them to also fulfill certain of their personal passions in the process, then they're more likely to want to stay, you know, for longer. Of course, we recognize that not being at a law firm isn't for everyone. So some people enjoy it and then decide, well, actually, it's time for me to move on, and that's fine, right? Others perhaps enjoy it less. They thought it was a good idea before they joined, but then they feel that, well, actually, I'm not really sure this law firm thing is for me, and that's fine too, because you only really ever know once you start. And then many others think that they found the place that they want to just stay at, you know, which is great as well, right? So the main thing is, and I think you mentioned this at the start, what was my journey like? The main thing is to have a great journey. No one really knows the destination when you start, right?
Yeah.
But as long as the journey is fulfilling, then it's more likely to lead you to somewhere better as you move.
So I've picked something as you're going on with the conversation. You said you enjoy working here. If you want to stay here, if you are a lawyer, are there other guys who are here who are professionals and are not lawyers?
Sure. Look, I mean, you know, I think looked at more broadly, with the changes in technology, with AI and so on, I think law firms will very soon have more non-lawyers than lawyers, okay, for a start, because law firms will be expected to deliver a range of services, many of which may not be seen as traditional legal services, right? And so we have what we call our business support staff, right? Who we, as much as we encourage great careers for our lawyers, we encourage great careers for them as well, whether it's in the finance team, whether it's in the business development and strategy team, whether it's in the knowledge team, you know, the IT and innovation team. So there are opportunities across the board. And some of the services we provide, for example, forensics work that we do, is provided by really, I mean, some of them may be lawyers, but they're not practicing as lawyers. There's the forensic accountants for example. And that's very complementary to some of our disputes, the disputes work that we do.
Yeah. So I've also seen a trend where I think it's the big four audit firms that introduced this, where you have certain services that you're known for, but you also have other services that you've outsourced. And I've recently seen law firms also doing that, especially the top tier law firms, where you have the practice of law being done in a certain aspect, and then you have another element, maybe company secretarial services that you've outsourced to an entity that is attached to you. Do you guys have that?
Sure. So we many years ago, we acquired the company administration business of Pricewaterhouse, and then subsequently to that, acquired a sole proprietor. Subsequent to that, we acquired a large book of business from Deloitte. And so now have probably the largest company administration business in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, which is entirely separately run, but obviously affiliated to us. And it's wonderful because there's a huge amount of synergy between what we do and what they do, right? So we often we obviously routinely refer clients to each other, but also support each other on professional services. Beyond that, and that business is called Adili now. Okay? And beyond that, we've now established a range of other Adili businesses. So for example, Adili provides payroll services, it provides internal audit and bookkeeping, some HR services, cybersecurity, whistleblowing and safeguarding, some proactive compliance and forensics work. So yeah, a whole range of services that are not, as you say, traditional law, but are effectively provided by an affiliated business that we work very closely with. Yeah.
No, just I want to build up on that point and also pick on a conversation that was told by Jessica Maina. She works here as well.
Yeah.
She told me Karim is very futuristic, and now you've also talked about all these other services. What does the future of law look like? So, and I want you to answer it in the form of, from a young practitioner, the guy who's coming straight from Kenya School of Law and they want to practice law and they're looking at opportunities in the future. And also for the senior lawyers where technology has now come in and you have new practice areas, and how do you want to align your law firm to tap into the future market?
Gosh, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be, I think it's it's a great question, a very complex question. Here, I mean, I don't know if I have an answer, but I'll try to paint it in bold strokes for you, right? I think some of the trends we'll see. Firstly, I think law isn't going anywhere, okay? AI isn't going to make us redundant, okay? It's going to require us to reskill, right? Because a lot of what we consider work and for which we charge will, over the next 3 to 10 years, be more effectively done by automated systems, right? And I think that's a great thing. Tell me, how much, when you go back to your days as trainee, how much of that work did you love doing? And how much did you find irritating, boring, repetitive, etc.? If you're being honest.
My pupil master is watching.
I see. Okay, well, let's talk to a hypothetical pupil then, okay? So, yeah. But I think you get my point, right? My point is that the fact is that a lot of what we do as young professionals isn't exactly very high up on the knowledge scale, right? So if that could be outsourced, if you like, that would be not a bad thing. It means you can move up the knowledge scale faster. Right? The second thing is, I think technology is going to create whole new domains of law that we haven't even yet examined. But lawyers will have to deal with the liability and risk issues that arise from that. The third is, in an African context, I just think that there's so much to do. Firstly, I think there's a lot to do in the area of the rule of law, right? you'll see that it's a particular passion of mine and of this firm. It doesn't normally sit very comfortably within the context of a commercial law firm, but we think it's absolutely vital for us as lawyers, no matter what type of law we practice, to stand up for the rule of law. Okay. I also think that the integration of Africa to the AFCFTA is going to throw up areas of law. We were talking earlier, for example, about your interest in data protection law and so on. You only need to see the changes in that arena to see how much more work there is to be done. Right? So I think the future actually for young lawyers is super bright. It just won't be the same as it was when I was practicing. And so, you know, the one thing I'd say to lawyers who are coming through now is, first, be very flexible and open-minded. Have a learning mindset, right? The one thing you can't lose is a learning mindset, right? Be prepared to give up what you know and learn new things. And become digitally conversant. Doesn't mean you need to be a coder or a software developer, right? If you are, that's great. But if you're not, at least be digitally conversant, because otherwise you're going to struggle, right? In the years ahead.
Now let's build up on the governance aspect. I've seen quite a number of your articles on the Elephant, once in a while Business Daily as well, right? Mm-hmm. And you talk about governance, and you venture into areas that commercial lawyers never really want to get into. I remember even looking at your articles, you talking about IBC, and you had opinions about it. Mm-hmm. What drove you into that? And what keeps you talking about governance? Where did the passion come from?
You know, I think what politicians do is they politicize everything, right?
Yeah. Everything becomes a political question.
And I think as lawyers, we need to be very wary of that and be courageous enough to remind everyone that the rule of law doesn't need to be politicized. Okay? We have a fantastic constitutional dispensation. We fought long and hard for it. It was the product of decades of amazing work by multitudes of people, many of whom were lawyers. Okay? And in 2010, we were bequeathed this new constitution that the people of Kenya voted for. Right? And it is our job as lawyers to make sure that we are governed and administered in accordance with that constitution. That should not be a controversial statement, right? And the data about economic growth and development and prosperity linked to a rules-based order is clear, right? Overall, democracies do better than autocracies, right? Overall, places that have a rules-based order do better than places that are chaotic. One can find outlier examples here and there. And of course, democracy should be fashioned to the circumstances of individual places. So we shouldn't ape the democratic structures from elsewhere. Absolutely. But standing up for the rule of law should be non-controversial. Okay? And I actually think it's our duty as lawyers not to shy away from it, but to embrace that. So the articles you'll see me writing are very much at the intersection of what I call rule of law, ethics, and economics. Right? And so I don't actually consider them controversial. I just think that perhaps too many of us put our heads in the sand. Okay? And also I think too many of us think, oh no, that's the domain of constitutional law specialists. We shouldn't venture there. I just think that's wrong.
Now, talking about, we have our unique problems as lawyers, just the whole aspects of ethics and the rule of law in our society. Probably most people never get to hear them. Would you throw your hat in the ring and probably run for office?
You mean in the law society?
Yes, in the law society.
I wouldn't say I wouldn't, right? But there are, extremely competent people currently on the council. I think we have a great president and vice president who are doing a tremendous job. and there are people who are very dedicated to this cause. So we've always been very supportive of the Law Society, and we think that both the Kenyan Law Society but also the East African Law Society play a really fundamental role and have often filled. The Law Society has, at its best, the Law Society of Kenya has been a important safeguard, right, and an important defender of what I call this rules-based order. So we support it. I support it as a firm. I haven't got any immediate ambitions to run for office, but if time and opportunity arose, it may well be something I consider in due course.
Let's talk about ALN Academy.
Well, I think it very much builds on these themes that we've been discussing, right? So we looked around Africa and realized that very many of the conversations about rule of law, ethics, and so on, a lot of capacity building was being done elsewhere by others for Africa. And we thought, well, that's not right. We should be in a position to facilitate intelligent conversations about the rule of law and ethics as Africans. Why do we need to wait for outsiders to tell us how to do that? And so we set up a charity. So ALN Academy is a charity, and through it we provide training and capacity building. We, more than anything, try to engender intelligent conversations, right? You may have seen an interview that Aisha Abdallah and myself, my partner Aisha and myself, had with our Chief Justice recently.
Yeah.
Right. So that's an example of the work that we do. Yeah, and we're very excited about it because I think it's our way of kind of putting the, how can I say, the business side of law on one side, right? And focusing really on some very fundamental aspects of what keeps our societies ticking. Yeah.
I mean, another passion of you is you've talked about AFCFTA. What got you there?
Well, listen, I'm not a trade lawyer, okay? I have partners in the firm who focus on that, but, I think one of the great accomplishments of this crop of African leaders is to embrace the idea that Africa, before trading with Europe or America or Asia, should trade with itself, right? The data on intra-African trade is very clear. It's poor, right? Too little. Africa is the continent that trades the least with itself, right? And there are lots of reasons for that. That's a whole different discussion as to why that's the case. But evidently, it's a problem that needs fixing, right? And Kenya was one of the early countries to ratify the AFCFTA, and this government in particular has put a lot of energy behind that initiative. Okay? You may have read there are now, the AFCFTA is actually operational, right? So there are goods particularly moving cross borders on a relatively frictionless basis. Now, I think, Africa was well placed to embrace this because we already have regional economic blocs, the EAC, for example, SADC, COMESA, just to name some. And I think those blocs are what will help drive the AFCFTA integration faster and further. And I'm personally very excited about it because at a time when, if you look at the challenges the EU is facing, for example, the challenges that NAFTA faced, so at the time when perhaps other parts of the world are beginning to splinter, Africa seems, at least in this regard, to be getting its act together.
Now, in the same breath that you're talking about, do you think as a nation we're very welcoming to people from outside who want to come and do business here? Because considering, probably I might not have the statistics here, but we do quite a number of cross-border transactions, and we are very friendly. We have a very, I don't know, how would you say about our regulatory framework? Is it more relaxed as compared to other nations?
Right. So I think Kenya does have, statistically, what I'd call the most open economy in sub-Saharan Africa. So whether it's the movement of capital, the absence of foreign exchange controls, and the very limited number of sectors in which local ownership is required. Right? So in that sense, I think Kenya's economic setup is very welcoming. Right? We rank fairly highly when it comes to regulatory certainty and so on. But I fear that we risk rolling back certain of these advantages that we've built on over the last 20 years, if not in law, but in practice. Okay? I think that it isn't evident to me that we're becoming an easier place in which to invest. It isn't evident to me that we're doing enough to attract capital. And I think that we need to think very long and hard about the climate that we are trying to create. Because, you know, capital, Mutua, is very fluid, right? It just goes to the place of least resistance. Right?
Yeah.
And you would be foolish to think that providers of capital are foolish. Okay? They're very smart. They don't want to lose their money. So think long and hard before investing. And so we need to work very, very hard. And I think there's much more that can be done to improve investor climate. But I think we're heading in the right direction. Right? Kenya is seen as a haven of safety and security. Right? We have a great manufacturing sector, a great tourism sector, a growing agricultural sector. We don't do enough for our agricultural sector, which is the backbone of our economy. Right? We are geographically fantastically placed. Right? Literacy is high. Female inclusion in the economy is higher here than in most places in Africa. Right? We're dynamic. Right? I mean, you hustled to get this interview, right?
Of course.
Yeah. And I think that's a hallmark of many Kenyans, right? Nairobi as a city has become highly attractive, right? You know, this Silicon Savannah and so on and so forth. But I also think we shouldn't get too carried away with our own hype, right? We need to look around the world and see how other countries are developing and ask ourselves long, difficult questions about whether we're doing enough. And you know, I don't believe in, how can I say, you know, many people are talking, but you know, relatively speaking, Kenya is doing very well. And I say, what do you mean relatively speaking? Oh, they said, you know, relative to the other places in Africa. I'm like, well, why is that our benchmark? You know, why is that our benchmark? Why isn't China or India or the US our benchmark? Why must we benchmark? You know, why should we discount ourselves to a lower base, right? I don't think we should. Kenyans are so incredibly talented that we should be aspiring for much more than being better than our peers. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A passion of mine is climate change. Mm-hmm. I've also realized that in one of your articles, you've talked about climate change and looking for homegrown solutions for climate change. Mm-hmm. What drove you towards that direction?
Well, you know, we are being ravaged. The continent is being ravaged. We are the continent who has contributed least to man-made changes in climate, and we are the continent that scientists will tell you will be affected the most by changes in climate. Right? You only need to look at what's happening in Mozambique frequently, right? Locust infestations, and of course, a lot of these things, at first blush, don't seem like climate change, but in fact are the long-run consequences, or rather the immediate consequences of long-run changes in climate. Right? So I think that, you know, this government's focus on climate change is spot on. Right? You know, recently we hosted the Africa Climate Summit, and I think the president's ambition was to put Kenya at the center of the South's agenda on climate. Right? And I think that the approach that has been taken, which is to embrace climate change, but make sure that the initiatives and measures that the world takes globally in terms of climate justice and climate finance are just and equitable, is the right one. And so I think, Kenya has the opportunity to position itself as a climate change hub. And in doing so, attract capital, people, and investment in a way that traditional industries wouldn't do, right? So I think that we have both an opportunity, but also a responsibility to our future generations to deal with this issue head on and to mitigate the effects of climate change for our children and grandchildren and the others to come. And as lawyers, I think we play a key role in shaping that agenda, right? Shaping those discussions, creating an enabling environment, and eventually for firms like ours, working on climate-related investments.
And I hope I'm not giving a free quick one or Wakili on this one. So when you talk about climate financing, climate change financing, what are some of the options that you're looking at?
So obviously,
that you guys do here in this farm.
Well, I mean, there are a number of things, right? If you think about the fact that over 90% of our grid, electric grid, is renewable. So obviously funding more in renewable energy. Funding more in what I call nature-based solutions. So whether that is kind of blue strategies, so using our oceans, our mangroves, right? And using those as carbon sinks, right? Whether it's in reforestation and the funding that will be necessary to reforest or to convert, for example, say, land that has been misused in the past and to reforest it. So these are the sort of things that I think will attract capital in the years ahead. And we as lawyers will have to create the architecture for that. And of course, there are now global conventions for this, whether from the EU and elsewhere. So you need to make sure that your projects are well structured. Then of course, there's the whole carbon trading regime, right? Recently, you saw there were some investors from Saudi Arabia, I'm told, who bought certain credits here. So that itself is an opportunity, right? But we just have to position ourselves for that. It's my pleasure.
Let me ask you, before we go, who is Karim when he's not practicing law, not doing ALN Academy, not doing anything professional? What do you do for fun?
It's not complicated. Well, I like to spend time with my family. I love the ocean. So if I could, I'd live by the ocean. To do anything to do with water. I love to travel and travel it to interesting places. I love to read and write. You know that I write, but I read, one of my rules is I never sleep without reading. I mean, not law, something else. So I'll tell to read, 30 to 50 pages at a minimum of any book I'm on every night. And I normally read 2 or 3 books at the same time. So that if one happens to be going through a rough patch in terms of being a bit boring, I can, switch to another.
So you've told me about so many aspects about your farm and about how you position yourself into many interesting areas of the practice of law. And you've done so much. You guys have a hand in all the, not all, but most big transactions that come to these parts of the world. How do you position your firm to be, when the client is looking, they're always looking for ALN?
I think it's, we all have marketing strategies and BD strategies and so on, but, at its base, it's very simple. Just put your best foot forward every day, right? And work with integrity and quality and efficiency. I've said that before. And then word gets around, right? Like it's not a big market, and people check with other people, right? Before you go to a restaurant, you normally check with somebody. Have you eaten there, right? And what was it like? And that's your referral. I think clients do the same thing. So I think we just try to put our best foot forward every day, and realize that this profession is one that just demands a lot from you. And as long as you, it also gives back a lot, right? It's incredibly rewarding. It can be rewarding financially, but more than that, it can be rewarding intellectually. It can give you a sense of satisfaction and growth. It's certainly done that for me. And that just brings me back every day with, you know, more energy than the day before. Yeah.
What's your favorite travel destination?
Gosh, look, I got to tell you, there's only one place that beats it every day, Kilifi.
Have you done Kilifi New Year?
I have, of course I've done. I have, yeah, but not at the place you went, maybe. Mine was more chilled.
I always go there every year.
Oh, is that right?
Every December.
Oh, okay, where are you?
Yeah.
Where do you go?
Kilifi New Year at Boba, beneath the Boba.
Oh, beneath the Boba. Yeah, I love the place.
I'm always there.
Yeah, I see. Okay, I'm not far.
Oh, not far.
Yeah, not far.
Do you have a home there?
In Bofa, yeah.
Oh,
yeah, in Bofa.
Good stuff. Thank you. Look at that camera and say, quick one Wakili.
Quick one Wakili.
Then tell them to subscribe.
And subscribe.
Thank you.
To this channel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tumemaliza.